The woman sitting across from me at my own dinner table looked my daughter in the eye, smiled warmly, and then turned to her husband and called her a desperate little farm girl in perfect French. She did it while passing the bread. She did it 6 inches from my face. And she had absolutely no idea that I understood every single word. That moment, that slow, elegant cruelty wrapped in a smile and a foreign language is where this story ends. But it started long before that dinner. It started the way most things in my life have started, quietly, in a place nobody important was paying attention to. To understand what happened that night, I need to take you back almost a year to a time when I still believed the best about people because my daughter asked me to. My name is Arthur Caldwell. I am 67 years old. I live on 14 acres of lakefront property just outside Cedar Hollow, Vermont, a town so small that the post office shares a wall with the hardware store and both close at 4. I have a golden retriever named Bo who sleeps on the porch even when it rains. I drive a 1994 Ford pickup that has needed a new muffler since 2008. Every morning, I walk to the Pine Cone Diner on Maple Street, sit in the same booth by the window, and drink 3 cups of coffee while the light comes through the glass. I fix screen doors for my neighbors, I sharpen their mower blades, I rebuilt Clara Henderson's front steps last spring and did not charge her a cent because that is what you do in a town like this. People around here know me as a retired carpenter, a quiet man who keeps to himself and never makes a fuss. They do not know the rest of it. They do not know that before I picked up a hammer for a living, I spent 8 years in the United States Army, 4 of them stationed at a military intelligence post near Toulouse, France. They do not know that I can read, write, and speak French as fluently as any man born there. The accent I carried home in 1987 got packed away the same week I started framing houses in Burlington. Nobody at a job site in Vermont needed to know I could conjugate a subjunctive verb, so I let it go quiet. I let people see what they expected. A man with calloused hands who builds things. I was fine with that. The only person who ever knew the whole truth about me was Margaret, my wife. She knew everything because she was the kind of woman you could not hide from. Not because she demanded transparency, but because she made honesty feel safe. Margaret died 7 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the doctor said 6 months. She got 14 because Margaret never did listen to anyone who told her what she could not do. She was a school librarian. Quiet voice, strong opinions, and her favorite thing to say, the one she repeated so often it became the rhythm underneath everything we did, was this: a man's true face is the one he wears when he thinks nobody important is watching. She said it when I came home furious about a subcontractor who cheated me. She said it once at a church dinner when the new pastor smiled for the congregation and snapped at the woman setting up the coffee behind him. She always said it gently, and I never fully understood it until she was gone. After Margaret died, the house got very large. I kept her reading chair in the living room. I still set 2 mugs on the counter some mornings before I catch myself. I still reach across the bed at night and find nothing but the smell of cedar from the chest she kept her quilts in. Grief does not leave. It just learns to sit in a different chair. But I had Grace, my daughter, my only child. Grace was 31 when this story started. An elementary school teacher in Montpelier. Smart, kind, stubborn in the best way. She had her mother's patience and my jaw. Grace came home every other Sunday for dinner. She brought pie from the bakery in town. She sat on the porch with me and Bo and told me about her students. Those Sunday nights kept me tethered to the world. Then she met Victor. Victor Renard, 38 years old, tall. Dark hair combed back in a way that looked effortless, but probably was not. He worked in international consulting, the kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties, but that nobody can quite explain. He had a firm handshake, a warm laugh, and a way of looking at Grace like she was the only person in any room. I wanted to like him. I tried hard. When Grace brought him home that first time, I grilled steaks on the back deck. Victor complimented the view of the lake. He knelt down and scratched Bo behind the ears until the old dog rolled over and gave him his belly. He was charming. He told a story about getting lost in a market in Lisbon that made Grace laugh so hard she nearly knocked over her glass. I watched them together, and I saw what every father wants to see: my daughter happy. But something small kept catching in my chest. Not a thought, not a suspicion. More like the feeling you get when a board is cut a 1/16 of an inch short and nobody notices but you. It was in the way Victor answered questions about his family. Quick, vague, smooth. Like a man who had rehearsed his answers long before anyone asked the questions. His parents were Henri and Colette Renard. They lived outside Lyon. His father ran some kind of import business. His mother came from old money, or so the story went. Victor spoke about them with respect but never warmth. He mentioned them the way you mention a company you work for, not a family you belong to. I noticed. I did not say anything. If this story is already pulling you in, if something about this quiet old man and his daughter and the stranger at the table is making your chest tighten, I hope you will stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so stories like this keep reaching people who need to hear them. The first time I met Henri and Colette was at a restaurant in Burlington. Grace had arranged it. She was nervous in a way I had never seen, adjusting her earrings 3 times on the drive over. "Dad, please just be yourself. They are wonderful people." "I will be fine, sweetheart." Henri Renard was a tall man with silver hair and a jaw that looked like it had never been wrong about anything. He wore a navy blazer and a watch that probably cost more than my truck. He shook my hand with both of his and said, "Arthur, what a pleasure." His English was flawless but lightly accented. Colette was elegant in a way that made the restaurant feel underdressed. Pearl earrings, a silk scarf at her throat. She looked at me with a smile that started at the mouth and never reached the eyes. "A contractor," she said when Grace mentioned what I did. How fascinating. The way she said it sounded like quaint. I let it go. The conversation was careful, polished, rehearsed. Henri asked about the property. 14 acres, I told him, lakefront, some of it zoned commercial. Henri's eyebrows lifted. "That is quite valuable, is it not?" "Just land," I said. "Been in the family a while." He nodded, but something behind his eyes moved like a calculator turning on. I had no idea that dinner would turn out to be the beginning of something I would spend the next 6 months trying to survive. The micro-humiliations started small, the way they always do. People who look down on you rarely begin with insults. They begin with corrections. The first time was at Grace's birthday dinner. I hosted it at the house. I made Margaret's recipe for pot roast, the one Grace grew up eating every birthday. Carrots, potatoes, fresh rosemary from the garden. The kitchen smelled like home. Colette arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile that looked like she was donating to charity. She set the wine on the counter, glanced at the pot roast through the oven window, and said to Henri in French, "They eat like this every week and call it a celebration." Henri chuckled softly. She did not know I was standing 3 feet behind her, pulling the roast from the oven, understanding every syllable. I set the pan on the counter. I said nothing. The pot roast was perfect. Grace had seconds. Victor praised it with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm, and for a moment I wondered if maybe Colette was just a snob and not something worse. That is what the second scene was for. 2 weeks later, Victor and Grace came to the house with Henri and Colette for a Sunday visit. I was on the porch replacing a hinge on the screen door when they pulled up. Colette stepped out of the car, looked at the house, and said to Henri in French, "This is what she is choosing over our family's name. A rotting porch and a man who smells like sawdust." Henri shushed her, but did not correct her. My hands tightened around the screwdriver. The wood under my knees suddenly felt harder than it was. I kept working. I finished the hinge. I stood up, smiled, and welcomed them inside. Nobody who wants to control how you feel can stand it when you refuse to react. That is a lesson I learned a long time ago, and it has never failed me. The third time was worse. Grace came to Sunday dinner alone one night. Victor was traveling for work. She sat at the kitchen table, and something about the way she held her coffee cup told me she was carrying something heavy. She asked about Margaret, what Mom would have thought of Victor, what Mom would have said. I told her Margaret would have loved anyone who loved her daughter well. Grace smiled, but it did not hold. It slipped at the edges like wet paint on a hot day. She changed the subject quickly, too quickly. She laughed at something that was not funny. I did not push, but I watched. And what I saw in her eyes was something I had not seen since she was 14, and the girls at school were cruel to her. A girl trying very hard to convince herself that she was fine. The fourth time happened at a restaurant. Grace, Victor, Henri, Colette, and me. Victor ordered for Grace without asking her. When the server brought the wrong side dish, Victor snapped at the young man, a college kid with shaky hands and a fresh apron, and said, "Is this really that difficult?" The boy apologized twice. Victor did not acknowledge either apology. He turned back to Grace and softened immediately, warm smile, gentle touch on her arm, as if the sharpness had never happened. But I saw it, and I saw Grace see it. She looked down at her plate. She moved the food around with her fork. She did not eat for the rest of the meal. People reveal themselves most clearly in how they treat people who cannot fight back. A waiter, a clerk, a stranger with no power. That is the mirror nobody thinks to cover. The fifth thing was the smallest, but it is the one that stayed with me the longest. Grace came to the house one afternoon in October. The leaves on the maples were burning red and orange, and the air smelled like wood smoke and cold earth. She hugged me at the door, and when she pulled away, I noticed a bruise on her wrist. Small, faint. The kind you might get from someone grabbing too hard. She saw me looking and pulled her sleeve down. "Bumped it on a cabinet door," she said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. I did not ask again. But I walked into the kitchen after she left, and I stood there with my hands on the counter, staring out the window at the lake, watching the last light drain off the water, and something inside me shifted. Not anger, something quieter and much more dangerous. I had been watching. I had been patient. I had given the benefit of the doubt more times than I could count. But there comes a moment in every story where silence stops being wisdom and starts being complicity. I had not yet reached that moment, but I could see it from where I was standing. Before I continue, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you are watching from. I read every single one. And knowing that you are out there, that these stories land somewhere real is what keeps me telling them. The detonating incident came 3 weeks before the engagement party. Victor had proposed to Grace in September. She said yes. The ring was beautiful and expensive, which I noted because Victor's consulting work never seemed to produce the kind of money that rings suggested. But I kept that thought to myself the way I kept most thoughts to myself those days. Henri and Colette flew over from Lyon for the engagement party planning. They stayed at the lodge in town, the nice one on the lake road with the stone fireplace in the lobby. I invited them to the house for coffee one morning. Henri and I sat on the back porch. Colette had gone inside to use the bathroom. Grace and Victor were not there yet. Henri looked out at the lake, at the old boat dock I had rebuilt 3 summers ago, at the 14 acres of meadow and timber stretching along the shoreline, and he said in English, "Arthur, your land is remarkable." My jaw tightened at the word "your." He said it with a possessive respect, the way a buyer talks about a house he has already mentally furnished. Then Colette came back outside and sat down, and she must have assumed I had gone to the kitchen because she turned to Henri and said in rapid French, "Has he mentioned the trust yet?" Henri shook his head. She continued, "Victor says the old man will sign anything if we frame it as protecting Grace. He still thinks we are here for the wedding." I was standing just inside the screen door, the coffee pot in my hand, the morning light falling across the kitchen floor. I heard every word, every single word. And in that moment, standing behind my own screen door in my own house, listening to 2 people plan how to steal my land while pretending to love my daughter, something inside me became perfectly still. Not angry, not sad, still. The way a lake goes flat before a storm, I set the coffee pot down quietly. I walked out onto the porch. I smiled. I poured them each a cup. I asked Colette if she wanted cream. She said, "No, thank you, Arthur, you are so kind." And I said, "It is nothing." And I meant that in a way she would not understand for several more weeks. I called my old friend Thomas Mercer that night. Thomas and I served together in Toulouse. He went into law after the army. Corporate litigation, white-collar investigations, the kind of man who could pull a thread and unravel an entire tapestry without breaking a sweat. Thomas, I said. It has been a long time. Too long, he said. What is going on? I need a favor. And I need you to be thorough. What Thomas found over the next 2 weeks confirmed everything I had feared and several things I had not. Arthur Renard's import company was a shell. It had been hemorrhaging money for 3 years. There were liens on the family estate outside Lyon, going back further than that. Victor's consulting firm was not a firm at all. It was a single-person entity with almost no revenue and significant debts tied to a failed investment scheme. There was a civil suit pending against him in France, creditors circling. The Renard family was not wealthy. They were drowning, and they had crossed an ocean looking for a lifeline. My 14 acres of lakefront land, zoned partially commercial, was worth more than everything they own combined. The trust they wanted me to sign was not estate planning. Thomas read through the document line by line and called me back at midnight. Arthur, he said, his voice flat and careful, this trust transfers beneficial ownership of your commercial parcels to an offshore entity registered in Luxembourg. Henri is the sole director. If you sign this, your land becomes collateral for their European debts. You would lose everything within 18 months. I sat in the dark of my study, the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the photograph of Margaret on the shelf across the room. The one where she is laughing with Grace on the porch, both of them squinting into the sun. They are using my daughter as the door. They think if they put a ring on her finger and a smile on their faces, I will hand them the keys and thank them for it. I thought about Margaret. I thought about what she used to say. A man's true face is the one he wears when he thinks nobody important is watching. I had seen their true faces. I had seen them through a language they thought was a locked door. And now I knew exactly what I was looking at. I did not sleep well those 2 weeks. I walked the property every morning at dawn, Bo trotting alongside me, the frost crunching under my boots, the lake still and gray as slate. I sat in my workshop some evenings, running my hands over the tools Margaret had given me for our 20th anniversary. A set of hand planes in a walnut case. I smelled the steel and the oil and the wood. I thought about what it means to build something with your hands and then watch someone try to take it with a pen. Thomas prepared the counter documentation, clean, notarized, airtight. He put it all in a leather folder and drove up from Boston to hand it to me personally. "You sure about this?" he asked. "I am sure. Bring the folder to the engagement party." He nodded. That night, I sat on the porch with Bo and thought about Margaret. I thought about her words. I thought about the face Henri wore when he believed nobody important was watching. And I knew that what I was about to do would break my daughter's heart, but it would break clean. A clean break heals. What they had planned would have broken her slowly, over years, in ways she might never have understood. "Grace, baby, I am sorry for what is coming, but your mother would never forgive me if I let this happen, and neither would I. I want to tell you something about Victor that made this harder than it should have been. He was not all bad." There was a night early on when Grace fell asleep on the couch after dinner. Victor covered her with the Afghan from the back of the chair, Margaret's Afghan. He did it gently, tucking it around her shoulders the way you would with someone you actually cared about. Then he sat down across from me, and we talked about woodworking for an hour. He told me about his grandfather, a carpenter in the south of France who built church pews by hand until his knuckles gave out. And when he talked about that old man, something in his face softened in a way that did not look rehearsed. I believe that part of him was real. But capacity is not the same as character. A man who can be kind when it is easy and cruel when it is useful is not a kind man. He is a man with a good mask. The engagement party was on a Saturday in November. Long tables on the back lawn, string lights threaded through the birch trees along the water. Wildflowers from the meadow in ceramic vases Grace had painted herself. 42 people. The air was cold and sharp, and the lake behind us was black as ink under a sky full of stars. Henri and Colette arrived in a hired car. Henri wore a charcoal suit. Colette wore a cream coat with a fur collar. They moved through the party like visiting dignitaries. Colette kissed Grace on both cheeks and told her she looked radiant. Then she turned to Henri and murmured in French, "The dress is from a catalogue. You can tell by the stitching." Henri smiled and sipped his champagne. My champagne, bought for this specific night, though not for the reason they imagined. Thomas stood near the drink table in a dark blazer, nursing a glass of water, the leather folder tucked under his arm like a newspaper. He caught my eye once across the lawn. One nod. Ready when you are. I looked at Grace. She was laughing with her friend Sophie near the dessert table. Her cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes bright, happy, genuinely, fully happy in a way that made my chest ache. I am about to take that away from her, and it is the right thing to do. And it is going to hurt more than anything I have done since the morning I held Margaret's hand and watched her stop breathing. The party was an hour in when I picked up my glass and tapped it with my ring. The sound carried cleanly through the cold air. Conversation stopped. The only sound was the wind off the lake, and somewhere down the shore, a loon calling. If everybody could give me just a moment, I said. I am not much for speeches. I would rather be up on a roof somewhere. That got a small laugh. I looked at Grace. She smiled at me. That trusting smile she had given me her whole life. I looked at Henry. He was relaxed, champagne glass loose in one hand. Colette beside him, poised and pleasant. Victor sat next to Grace, his arm around her chair. None of them had any idea what was coming. My daughter, I said, is the best thing I have ever been part of. Her mother would have been proud of the woman she became. And I have spent every day since Margaret passed trying to make sure Grace never has to wonder if she is loved or if the people around her are telling her the truth. I let that sentence land. I watched Henri's smile hold steady. Colette's fingers tightened slightly around her glass. I want to thank Henri and Colette, I said, turning toward them and raising my glass in their direction, for traveling all this way, for welcoming my daughter into their family. That is not a small thing, crossing an ocean for people you're just getting to know. Henri dipped his head. The pleasure is ours entirely, Arthur. I am sure it is, I said, and something in my voice must have shifted because I saw Colette's smile flicker. Just at the edges, the way you notice a crack in plaster you thought was solid. I have been thinking a lot lately, I continued, about something my wife used to say. She said that a man's true face is the one he wears when he thinks nobody important is watching. I paused. Henri went still. Since our guests traveled all the way from Lyon, I said, and since they have been kind enough to share their thoughts about my home, my family, and my daughter in their native language over the past several months, I thought it only fair to respond in kind. I looked directly at Colette. Her face began to change. Slowly, like a photograph developing in reverse, the color draining out of it frame by frame. And then I spoke. I spoke in French, clear, fluid, unhurried. The accent I had packed away for 30 years came out like an old tool that still held its edge. I said, for 6 months you have sat in my home, eaten at my table, and spoken about my daughter as if she were a transaction. You called her a desperate farm girl. You mocked my work. You laughed at my home. And you planned to steal my land through a fraudulent trust while smiling at me over coffee. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. Henri's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Colette's face went white. Victor's arm slid off the back of Grace's chair like it had been cut. 42 faces turned, first toward Henri and Colette, then toward me, then toward Grace, whose expression was moving from confusion to something else entirely. Something cracking open. "Dad!" she started, her voice small. "I am sorry, sweetheart," I said, and I meant it more than I have ever meant anything. I did not want you to find out this way, but I could not let you find out after the wedding. I reached down and took the leather folder Thomas handed me. I set it on the table and opened it for everyone to see. 3 weeks ago, I said, Henri and Colette asked me to sign what they called a family trust. They said it was estate planning, a gift to protect Grace and Victor. I had my attorney review it. I turned to Thomas, who stepped forward with the calm of a man who had done this 1,000 times. "What the document actually does," Thomas said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent party, "is transfer ownership of Arthur's commercial property to an offshore entity in Luxembourg. Victor Renard is listed as sole director. If Arthur signs it, his land becomes collateral for the Renard family's European debts. It is not a gift, it is an extraction." Gasps down the table. Grace's colleague covered her mouth. The caterer stopped mid-pour. Henri found his voice first. It came out thin and dry. "Arthur, this is a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, I said. I heard you explain it yourself, in your own kitchen, in your own language, thinking the dumb American carpenter on the other side of the screen door could not understand a word of it. I looked at Victor now. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Arthur, this is not what," he began. Grace cut him off. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than I expected, colder than I had ever heard from her. "You told your parents I was predictable," she said. I heard the word land in my chest like a physical thing. She looked at him the way Margaret used to look at something broken that was not worth repairing. "You used me," she said, and I watched my daughter reach down, slow and deliberate, and pull the ring from her finger. She set it on the table next to his untouched plate. "I was going to build a life with you," she said, "and you were building a trap." She stood. She did not cry. She did not run. She walked around the table to where I was standing, and she stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder, the way Margaret used to stand when we faced something hard together. That is my girl. Henry's mouth worked like he wanted to salvage something. Colette sat rigid, her face a mask of shock and shame. The elegance cracked open to reveal something small and desperate underneath. Victor stared at the ring on the table. I handed him a second document from the folder. "That is an itemized invoice," I said, "for every expense your family has incurred during your stay in my guest cottage, and a formal notice that you will need to vacate my property by tomorrow morning." "Arthur," Henry said, "surely we can discuss this." "We discussed plenty," I said, "in 2 languages, apparently. I just did not join in until now." I picked up my champagne glass, the one I had poured an hour ago when I still had to pretend everything was fine. I took a slow sip. Then I set it down with a small, deliberate tap on the table. "Oh, and Henri," I said, "that pot roast Colette called a peasant meal. It was my wife's recipe. She spent 20 years perfecting it, and it is worth more than anything you have ever put on a plate." Nobody spoke. The wind came off the lake and moved the string lights above us. Somewhere down the shore, that loon called again, long and low and mournful. I looked down at Grace. She looked up at me, tears standing in her eyes, but her jaw was set, steady, sure. "You ready?" I asked, quiet, just for her. She nodded. We walked away from that table together, past the string lights, past the wildflowers in their painted vases, past 42 faces in one leather folder that had just ended, a scheme 2 people had flown 4,000 miles to execute. Behind us, I heard Colette's voice crack, high and desperate, calling after us in French. I did not turn around. I had heard everything I needed to hear from that family months ago, over coffee and bread, thinking the old carpenter could not understand a word. "You were wrong about many things, Henri, but you were most wrong about this. Thinking that a quiet man who builds things with his hands would not know exactly what to do with the truth once he had it." Grace slipped her hand into mine as we walked toward the house. The same way she used to when she was small enough to sit on my workbench and hand me nails from a coffee can and call it helping. "Thank you, Dad," she said quietly, "for hearing what I could not." "Always, sweetheart," I said, every single word. The months after that night moved slowly, the way healing always does. Grace found a small apartment in Montpellier, closer to her school. She painted the walls herself, a soft blue that reminded me of the lake in summer. She started cooking Margaret's recipes on weekends, calling me to ask about measurements and timing. I drove up every other weekend with groceries and bow-riding shotgun. We would cook together in her small kitchen, the windows fogging with steam. She did not mention Victor, not for a long time. When she finally did, it was a Tuesday night in February. "Dad," she said, "do you think Mom would have seen through him sooner?" I sat in my chair by the window, bow at my feet, the snow falling thick and silent outside. "I think your mother would have said that seeing clearly is not about speed," I told her. "It is about courage." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I am glad you were watching. I am always watching, sweetheart." That spring, I joined the Veterans Breakfast Group at the community center. Every Wednesday morning, 6 old men and bad coffee and stories that got better every time we told them. Thomas drove up from Boston once a month, and we would sit on the porch and talk about Toulouse and the people we used to be. I started volunteering at Grace's school. reading to the first graders on Friday afternoons. One afternoon, a little girl named Emma looked up at me and asked, "Are you somebody's grandpa?" "Not yet," I said, "but I am somebody's dad." She nodded seriously, the way children do when they decide something is acceptable. In June, Grace came home for a Sunday dinner, pot roast, Margaret's recipe. We ate on the porch with the lake turning gold in the evening light. Grace set down her fork and looked at me. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For not just telling me, for showing me, for letting the truth come from their own mouths so I could never doubt what I saw." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That is what your mother would have done," I said, "only more elegant." Grace laughed, the real kind, and for the first time in over a year, my daughter's laugh did not have anything hiding behind it. When I was young, I believed strength meant never flinching. The Army taught me that strength means knowing when to wait, and growing old has taught me the real truth. Strength is not about what you can endure or what you can destroy. It is about what you protect. It is about standing quietly beside the people you love and making sure that the truth, however painful, reaches them before the lie does. Margaret knew that. She knew it before I did. She always did. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you love or someone who loved you so quietly you almost missed it, share it with them. Hit subscribe so you never miss a story. And leave me a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest. Sometimes the people who need these words the most find them because someone like you took 10 seconds to pass them along. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.